Welcome to a series of short videos of the Geneva Water Hub on the topic of reshaping the approach to water cooperation for peace building. My name is Mara Tignino, and I'm reader at the Faculty of Law and the Institute for Environmental Sciences at the University of Geneva and lead legal specialist at the Geneva Water Hub. Today, we will ask to Mr. David Kaelin from the Water and Habitat Unit of the International Committee of the Red Cross, a question about the linkages between the development and the humanitarian sectors, especially in the context of protracted armed conflict. Good morning, David, and thanks for accepting our invitation.
Good morning, Mara. Thanks for inviting me.
So you have several years of experience in conflict zone in different regions of the world. Could you please share with us your opinion on why it is important in a protracted crisis to link the humanitarian and development response, especially when talking about water? Could you share with us some good practices in this regard?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Well, Mara, first for the reason why in many countries, and certainly in most countries in situation of conflicts where we work, humanitarian organizations end up having decades of sustained presence. Quite famously, on average, for the International Committee of the Red Cross, we have been present in our 10 largest operations for over 45 years. So duration. It means in addition to our expertise in crisis, we also develop a fairly intimate knowledge of how systems fail on the duration. Meanwhile, working on the long term at scale and usually in close contact to the actors of governance is the strong suit of development actors. And now in practice, what we see is that in many contexts, be it before crisis, during crisis, or after crisis, humanitarian actors and development actors are often present in the same context and can be working with the same local partners, the local authorities, the communities, the service providers. Yet, for a long time, there was really a divide in space, where we had the hard to reach areas reserved for humanitarians or the easier, stable areas for developers. There's also a divide in time again, where humanitarian response was typically planned on a 12-month cycle and focused on emergencies, whereas development programs would be looking at decades. Yet, ironically, and not in all contexts, but in some contexts, achieving humanitarian goals or development goals can take very similar shape. Typically, and for example, reaching a sustainable humanitarian impact or reaching development gains both requires usually several years of engagement and at a certain scale. This is valid in rural context. We see it which can be resource intensive, usually require a sustained engagement of communities. It's valid in urban context, which involve more complex planning, works, larger systems, intimate work with service providers. It is also valid in situation where pre-crisis there is a situation of underdevelopment and where the basics have not been yet laid. With this short reason in mind, there is, and again in some specific contexts, a consensus building up that there can be just too many connection points and areas of interest for humanitarian and development actors to ignore each other. Now, with that in mind, a few general lessons talking about good practices and starting with the basics. Here's a couple of general lessons based on ICRC experience. It starts, and it might sound a bit trivial, but it starts with mindset, building up in our teams a mindset of openness, curiosity rather than ignorance. Sounds trivial, but we all know how difficult it is to break or to change the mindset. One step further, good cooperation and coordination. So here we're talking really about sharing information, sharing maybe expertise, and when sharing partners, being consistent and coherent in how we communicate and deal with them. Then for the developers, rather, we are keen to promote what we call no regret investments in emergency preparedness, which can be neglected. Taking an all hazard approach is factoring in the whole picture and not just the technicalities, and maybe tapping into what humanitarians may have to say about system collapse or resilience building. On the other hand, for humanitarians, we often advocate to not wait for a crisis to hit before establishing some relevant partnership with local partners. During a crisis, maintaining coordination and cooperation is key, trying not to lose pre-crisis connections, keeping exchanging information, and possibly, but that's one aspect of it, exploring possibilities for flexible multi-year funding. But it's not all about the fund. Finally, of course, and again, maybe a bit trivial, investing and working with the local authorities, with the local service providers is an absolute necessity. Working on their capacity, their resilience, their transparency, including really aspects of service delivery efficiency and cost recovery are all in our experience key aspects. And then, of course, building redundancies in the systems from source, if we're talking about water, from source to delivery, investing where possible in low-tech solutions, low-cost backup system, especially in terms of energy efficiency, and again, possibly build up the cash reserves or helping the service providers to have sufficient funds to respond to crises. And now, Mara, just to conclude, I have a few examples that we like to present these days. I mean, projects in which the ICRC is engaged with development partners, and which we like to present as steps in the right direction. Mm-hmm. A first example goes in the direction of what we would present as a faster and more efficient early recovery directly after a crisis, which is fostered by, on the one hand, a field presence that the ICRC may have, on the other hand, a capacity for scale and long-term that a partner may have. A typical example for that is our project in Marawi, in the Philippines, where the ICRC contributed with the local water authority to a master plan which was then adopted and implemented by the Asian Development Bank. So a good example of transfer. Another example of consistently paving the way for development goals in a stepped approach, but with a common strategy and a common plan, is well illustrated by our water project in Goma, for example, that is currently ongoing with the World Bank. In Juba, in South Sudan, where we have a project with the GIZ, or in Mosul, in Iraq, with the AFD, the French Development Agency. Three good examples of what we would say paving the way. You have the example of how to tap into decades of presence of both development and humanitarian actor, but in a joint manner that goes toward more efficient and resilient operation. This, at the moment, the best example we have is in Gaza, with the ICRC Resilience Project in Gaza, which we do jointly with the Swedish SIDA. Finally, and I will finish on that, there are a few contexts that may be more sensitive, but where yet you don't want to go into total collapse, and you want to preserve some of the earlier development goals. I mean, the ultimate example for that one we have at the moment is in Syria, notably with an initiative we called Too Big to Fail, that aims just at that. For the moment, it is still running with a rather typical humanitarian funding, but on a multi-year plan. So there's already an evolution in the mindset. We might partner hopefully later on. So Mara, I hope these are a few very quick examples that help you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, David. It was great to hear your wide and long experience in conflict zone. Thank you.